was having a conversation with it started at a Cholent Schmooze, and was a conversation with my son at the Cholent Schmooze, really, and then it continued because there's some young guys who were at this thing. We continued it, and then I was talking about it, and the parents of one of those kids were at the table, and the mother, who's Liz Gaifman, told me that this conversation sounds like the Bhagavad Gita, and the movie Bagger Vance, which is based on the Bhagavad Gita, and so it was so I was looking at it, and she was right. I mean, it did seem very much like this discussion. We were talking about the specific was, should it make a difference if you're being asked to be a soldier in war in which people are going to be killed? Should it be different than being asked to do genocide, like Amalek? Is the fact that you're asked to wipe out an entire people somehow, does genocide make it different, somehow worse, or more troubling, that you're asked to do genocide as opposed to just, let's say, a war where you're killing people? And I was making the argument that it shouldn't really make a difference, that it's the killing of people that's troubling, and whether you're interested in killing all of them or you're not killing all of them, at least that was the point I was making. I was suggesting that the fact when God asks us to kill people in battle, that's a chok. It's not something that makes sense. It's not, especially because oftentimes when you're in battle, you're not killing wicked people necessarily. Maybe you're often killing regular people and sometimes innocent people when you're doing it. So if God tells you to do it, you're supposed to do it, but you're doing it like a chok. And it shouldn't make a difference. This was at least the point I was making. It was like when people argue about hate crimes. Should there be a hate crime designation? Let's say you've already proven that this guy killed somebody willfully, premeditatedly. So should the fact that he hates him because of his religion, does that somehow make it more heinous? So anyways, that was the point that he was arguing, on the other side. And so I was looking at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. So this is like in just like chapter 1 and chapter 2, or chapter 2. It's not like very far into it. There's this guy, he's who's called Arjuna, and he's a warrior. And he is supposed to go to war. And there's a big war about to happen, Mahabharata war. And it's a very big war that's about to happen. And he is distraught because he doesn't see the point of the war. First of all, he's going to end up having to kill people that he knows and loves, because there are people he knows and loves on the other side too. It's not just his side. And including family, including his teachers, there's on the other side. And also, what does he gain from it all? Let's say he gains territory or he gains kingship, but what was the value of it? Why is that so important that it would justify killing people? So he's sort of depressed and burdened by this thinking, and his chariot driver, who is God, happens to be his chariot driver. So his chariot driver is now explaining to him why he should be continuing in battle. And that is because one of the points he makes is, what do you think you're doing anyways? When, let's say you kill somebody, what do you think you've done? You haven't harmed their soul. Their soul is going to continue. It was here before and it's going to continue afterwards. You've essentially, you've done the equivalent of removing their clothing or their garment. You can't, just like, that God existed before and God exists afterwards, so does the soul exist before and exist afterwards. And so what do you think you're really doing anyways? You're not, do you think you're somehow ending them? You're not ending them. Anyway, so it was just this sort of interesting conversation, and it all came out of that word avatar.
Really?
Yeah, because God,
yes.
in the God that's the chariot horseman is an avatar. He's,
I see.
One of their names or whatever.
Yeah.
But the name, but it allowed for, because for different reasons with different ones of these young guys, I've been having this conversation about the nature of God and the nature of us. And like when we say that our soul is like a part of God above, what do we mean when we say that? In other words, am I God? Am I God? Is it wrong for me to say I am God? And it feels wrong, but what's wrong with it? Isn't my soul? Don't we say that when we say that God is one? Don't we say that the Rambam say that there's nothing besides God, that there's nothing of substance besides God? And so ultimately, don't we have to say that everything is somehow God and that we're God? And so clearly we don't at some point, but the real burden is to explain why we don't, not the other way. It seems like when we talk about the nature of the soul and our being, and we say we are the breath of God, that somehow our soul is the breath of God, and that aren't we God? So also that part over there, it talks about a little bit. It does open up the conversation about who are we, what is the soul, and I don't know.
Since God is so many things are running around. Since God is everything, then every time we kill a plant or chop down a tree, I mean, God is part of that too. I mean,
right,
maybe
but ultimately it would be God doing it to God.
Right.
Right. So
with the genocide, was it argued with the genocide that is different because it actually, I mean, with war, those people go on, their family, you can defeat them. They can even become part of you. God, with the one genocide, I think, which is Amalek, is trying to wipe out something evil.
The Canaanite tribes.
Right?
Right. Like also Midian is pretty much a genocide. I mean, you do leave little kids, I guess, open, but they're not going, didn't seem like they're going to emerge as Midianites. And it could be the 7 nations are genocide. It could be they are. Yeah, but I'm saying I get the philosophical thing, but like if you're bothered by it morally.
Right. Well, war.
Yeah. Anyways, I just thought I'd say it out loud, because then I say it out loud, chance I'll remember it one day. Okay. Now, how did I get here? I don't know. I have to go back here. Hi, Estelle.
Hi, Rabbi. Hi, Lois.
Hi. It's good to see your avatar as well, Estelle. Okay.
Hi, Estelle. I'm sorry. For some reason, I couldn't unmute for a minute. Okay. Hi.
There you go. Yeah, so the last thing we did, I think, was Mitzvah 108, where he did a kind of summary and identified 13 previous, altogether 13 mitzvot that have to do with purity and impurity. And so maybe we'll look at that one more time. That is that he commanded us and instructed us to administer the laws of purification water. We're talking about, again, the water with the ashes of the red heifer, in order to purify us from contact with the dead, about which they said that it renders impure in one way and purifies in another way. And it has this kind of surprising, almost paradox, that it, on the one hand, there is a Kohen who is sprinkling it in order to purify another person, but while he does that, he himself becomes impure. He's not impure for 7 days, but he is impure for 1 day, as explained in the analysis of this commandment. And should know that these 13 types of impurities, the counting of which precedes this, being the impurities of a carcass, creeping animals, of foods and drinks, of a menstruant woman, of a woman after childbirth, the tzara'at of a person, of garments, the tzara'at of houses, of a zava, of semen, of a corpse, of purifying waters, and the purification of each one of them is written in the Torah in many verses and with many laws and stipulations, as is written in Parshat Shmini, Parshat Tazria Metzora, and in Parshat Parshas Parah. And these 4 sections completely include all of these impurities. Moreover, the order of Taharot includes all the laws of all these types and analysis of each type. Tractate Taharot, Machshirin, and Oktzin, these 3 tractates only contain the impurity of food and that which is attached to this topic, and those laws from other types of impurities, the mention of which is relevant to it. However, they only appear contingently. Likewise, Tractate Nida includes all the laws of the impurities of a menstruant woman and a woman after childbirth, and some of the laws of a woman after childbirth are also in Tractate Krisos. And in Tractate Negoim, all the laws of the blemishes of people, garments, and houses. And Tractate Zovim includes the laws of a Zov and a Zava and of semen. And Tractate Ohalot contains the laws of the impurity of a carcass. They're talking about their impurity of a human corpse as well. And Tractate Parah includes the purifying waters to render impure and to purify. But no tractate was dedicated to the impurity of carcasses or the impurity of creeping animals. So Ohalot, when he called it a carcass, he really meant a corpse. There is no tractate of the Talmud or of Mishnah even that is devoted to the impurity of animal carcasses or the shratzim, the creeping animals. However, their laws are scattered in many places in this order, and the majority are in tractates Kalim and Tahorot. And likewise, did they speak about many questions about these topics in Tractate Ediot. Tractate Ediot is a kind of grab bag of laws. Again, it's Mishnah. It is, what happened was, apparently, there was a day where there was a transition or transformation in the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin are specifically the body of elders that were judges and legislators, 71 altogether. But the Sanhedrin also was like a yeshiva. In other words, it was a place where people studied and discussed the law, which would be for the purpose of legislating or deciding law. And so the Sanhedrin, that body could include many more than the 71. It can include, let's say these 71 are primarily would then be teachers, and there would be, they would themselves would have students, or there would be other colleagues that were not technically part of the Sanhedrin, but they'd be part of the study, of the discussion, and maybe even part of the resource, because in those times, individuals were the libraries. There wasn't a written library initially. The human beings were a library. And so, yeah. So, so what happened was, Rabbi Gamliel, this is in the time of Rabbi Akiva and others, and Rabbi Gamliel had been the Nasi. He was in charge of what happened at the Sanhedrin, and he was demoted because of some incidents that happened in which people felt he unfairly treated Rabbi Yoshua. So he was demoted, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was promoted, a young scholar who was promoted to be the head of the Sanhedrin. And at that time, he opened up the Sanhedrin to discussion from a lot more people, a much wider range of scholars entered. They added lots of benches. That's how they describe it to the Beit Midrash, that his standards were much broader for who could be part of the conversation. So that spurred this real intense sharing of wisdom. And so Tractate Ediot is one of the collections from that day. That's at least the tradition about it. These are people testifying about law as they were taught from their teachers. So Ediot means testifying or testimonies. So anyways, that's that tractate. And we've already explained this order in its entirety in the commentary of the Mishnah, meaning the order of Tarot is a commentary that does not require any other book with it for any topic related to impurity. So he's very confident. I mentioned that last time, that the Rambam is very confident in his commentary on the Mishnah that includes everything you would need. Okay, Mitzvah 109. That is that he commanded us that we immerse in mikvah waters, and that we then become pure from one of the various types of impurities with which we become impure. And that is his, may he be blessed, saying, and he shall bathe in water. And it comes in the tradition that it is water that all of one's body can enter, and that is the measurement of a mikvah, unless the waters are running. All right, so that's mikvah. Mikvah is standing water. That's what it means, standing water, collected sort of standing water. If this water is not standing, then it is not a mikvah. There is another option, which is unless the waters are running waters, which have no measurement, as it's explained in the analysis of this commandment. So there's something else that's more like a stream. Streams, if you're using a stream, what would be living waters, because there's certain times when you're supposed to drip or use living waters, which is moving water. Those don't have a restriction as to how much water has to be there. But the sitting water, the collected sitting water, which is a mikvah, that does have an amount, which is called 40 saw, which is the amount of water it would take for somebody to enter it and be able to cover themselves. And it is among the stipulations, specifically for the Zav, that the water that purify him be running water. So a Zav cannot go into a mikvah. A Zav, the male Zav, has to go into running water. So he'd have to be like in a natural stream where the water's moving, as opposed to a mikvah, which is rainwater, where the water is standing. And I emphasize that because this is one of the challenges of a mikvah. Let's say you want to have a filtration system in the mikvah. The the mikvah water, when a person goes in the mikvah, nowadays it's mostly a woman who's going into the mikvah. When she goes into the mikvah, that water has to be still. It has to be still water, which means that the filter cannot be on. The water can't even move through a filter when it's on. That's how careful we are about this notion of still water. If it's a filter where water is pushed through something so that there's water in motion, that would be a problem. That would not satisfy the requirement of mikvah. Whereas this person, the zav, it's the opposite. He needs to be in moving water, not standing water. The intention of the statement that immersion is a positive commandment is
Rabbi,
not that, yeah, go ahead. Yep.
What about a lake? Is a lake considered standing or moving?
Right. So again, my understanding of this these are based on my questions to other people, is that Lake Michigan is considered standing water. But even though there is water that empties into it, but it's typically generally that's considered a minor issue, and therefore it's considered standing water. But man-made lakes, it's not so simple. Those ones, especially if they have like pumps going into them to pump water into them, etc. So it's not so simple. So like, people like might live in a community that has a man-made lake. Those are not so simple. And each one needs an expert, to sort of rule on whether it is in fact a mikvah. But I was told, Rabbi first did say that he was cautioned that if somebody uses Lake Michigan as a mikvah, that they have to be careful that because part of the immersion, the notion of the immersion is that your entire body has to be immersed. So if your feet have mud on them, if you've collected mud or rocks and they're stuck to the bottom of your feet, it could interfere with the effectiveness of the mikvah. So he did say that if somebody's going there, they need to bring a mat or something so that their feet are not don't get sticky with mud or rocks. But he was open to the idea of somebody using Lake Michigan as a mikvah.
Is the Jordan River a mikvah?
Yes. So the thing is, some of these rivers have, as the river turns, there can be places where just because of the nature of the flow of the water, where there's some water that is not actively flowing, but it's more pooled on the side. So if you have water that's pooled on the side and it has the requisite amount, so again, theoretically, that might be a mikvah, but all practical halachic questions need to be asked to somebody. Each situation needs to really have an expert looking at it to decide. If you're in the flowing part of the river, then it is living waters, not mikvah necessarily. But again, sometimes there's overlapping in some of these situations, and it needs a real expert. Okay. And the intention of the statement that immersion is a positive commandment is not that anyone impure is obligated to perforce become purified in the same way that anyone covered by a cloak must make tzitzis, or anyone with a home must make a parapet. He's talking about on the roof, that if you have a roof, if you have a flat roof, you have to have some kind of fencing or a wall that goes around that protects people from falling off. So these are mitzvahs, what we would call mitzvah chiyubis. This is a mitzvah that, but because of the circumstances, you must act. You must act. Rather, what is intended is the law in the law of immersion, and that is the Torah told us anybody who wants to be purified from his impurity will only complete it with immersion in water, and then he will be purified. So this is in the ballpark of what he has said before about purification. It's not that you must do this, it's only that if you want to become pure, you must do this. But if you, there is no obligation that is pressing to become pure. Again, let's say it's before Pesach and you need to eat the Korban Pesach, then there is a pressing issue that you must become pure. Let's say you're supposed to bring a Korban, that would be a pressing issue. But in general, you are not, there's nothing wrong with being impure, is what he's saying. There's nothing wrong with being impure. It's just that if you want to become pure, then you have to follow this procedure. The language of the Sifra, Achrei Mot, section 5.3 is, and he shall bathe in water. And I think that it is a decree of the king that he must immerse. In other words, it's what he calls Gzeras HaMelech. In other words, it's not something, this is like something in that ballpark of what we would call chok. It's not a law that you would necessarily intuit without being told about it. Hence, we learn to say, and then he may come to the camp from his impurity. This hints to the principle that we've explained, that the law is only that anyone who wants to become pure do this. That is the law, and that is the commandment, and not that he be obligated perforce to immerse. Rather, anyone who wants to remain impure and not enter the camp of the divine presence for a certain time, they're allowed to do so. And has already appeared in the book of truth that one who becomes impure and immerses is purified, but he does not complete his purification until the sun goes down for him. It also appears in the accepted tradition that when he immerses, his naked flesh must be in contact with the water itself, and that there not be anything separating between him and the water. And that's what I mentioned before about the mud on the feet. All this commandment has been explained to you, and that is the commandment of immersion, and it includes the regulations of the mikvah, the regulations of bathing, the regulations of one who was immersed that day before sunset. And this law is explained in Tractate Mikvos and in Tractate Tvul Yom. Also see Parshat Metzora and the mission of Torah in immersion pools. So what he's saying here is included is not only the rules for immersion, but also the design of mikvah. Like, how do you design a mikvah? It's quite an intricate design. It has many features. For instance, in a present day mikvah, we have a pool that collects rainwater. But how does the rainwater get into the pool? The pool is in a lot of, in most mikvahs, the pool is alongside the immersion pool. So you'd have like a cistern or well or pool that has collected rainwater, and then that is connected through, there'll be like a little channel, like a hole into what looks like a kind of like a large hot bath or hot tub, kind of thing. Some might look more like a big bath, which has regular water in it. So when they connect the regular water, the kind of water from a faucet kind of water or from a hose, when it connects with the water that is the rainwater, it's infused with the kind of identity of the rainwater. So it all becomes as if it's all rainwater. But that cistern or well or pool where the rainwater is, how does the rainwater get there? It's in a building. So you have to have a system for collecting the rainwater as it falls on the roof, and it would come down through a pipe, and it's intricate. Also, Chabad has a tradition that is different than everybody else, which is that the pool of the rainwater is underneath the pool that you immerse in, not alongside it. So now a lot of modern mikvahs have both. They have a pool alongside it and a pool underneath it. so again, how does the water get into that one? And there's just lots of creative thinking that's gone into it. But in its most basic form, these mikvos have been around for thousands of years. It's one of the ways they identify a Jewish city if they are doing an archaeological dig and they want to identify whether this city was inhabited by Jews or not. One of the ways they can tell is the mikvahs, because reliably in the communities where the Jews lived, there are mikvos. This is, you're going back to places that were active cities maybe 2,000 years ago or more than 2,000 years ago, and they reliably find mikvos in these towns. There was one town I went to with pastors, which was a Jewish town, which in Latin or Greek they call it Capernaum. In Hebrew they call it Kfar Nahum, the village of Nahum, and it was known to be a Jewish town. But they didn't find mikvahs, and it baffles them why they're not finding mikvahs over there in Kfar Nahum. And the fact that it baffles them just shows you how common it is for them to find mikvot at these different places. These mikvot are also relying on rainwater. Some of them are just open and are relying on rainwater from during the rainy season. Some of them are also connected to wells that would have collected the rainwater, and you'd be able to cover it and preserve the rainwater during the dry season. So I don't know if it's hard to believe that some of these mikvahs, the ones that are just open, were active all year round, because there's several months where it doesn't rain in Israel, and especially in some of these places where it's more desert-like conditions. But they even found mikvos on Masada. All right. We are going to pause here, and we are going to continue with Mitzvah 110, back to Tzarat again, a little bit about Tzarat and the purification process for the Metzorah. I look forward to we'll get through it. We'll move through it. Yeah.
Rabbi, Capernaum, wasn't there a synagogue there?
Yeah, there's a synagogue there. In fact, that synagogue, they have evidence that the synagogue itself is built on a synagogue. So there's one synagogue that you see now, I think they say it's from like the 3rd century. But I was thinking that, if it's from the 3rd century in its location, it's very likely that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish or their students might have used that, might have davened there, because it's on the shores of the Kinneret. But they have evidence, you can sort of see that there was a floor underneath it, which they think is from a few hundred years before that. Might have been from like the 1st century before the Common
There's
Era.
a tradition I'm told that Jesus preached there.
That's why we went there. Because I was with the pastors, and there are supposedly miracles that he did at that town. But see, it's identified as a Jewish town. You have a dramatic synagogue there, plus stones with all sorts of Jewish symbols, but you don't have mikvahs, and this puzzles them, because Migdal, which is also on the Kinneret, which was for sure around in the 1st century, that is full. It has a shul there, but it has a bunch of mikvahs. So the question is, why doesn't that place have mikvahs? There's another interesting issue that comes up with the tour guides, which they get nervous. Some of the tour guides, when I brought it up with them, they actually get nervous about it, which is that you see from like, I don't know when it starts, from about the year 200 and on, when they find Jewish settlements, you see the place where mezuzahs would have been. But when you look at earlier parts, you don't see parts in the rock where mezuzahs would have been. Now, you could argue maybe that during certain times, they didn't allow the Jews to have mezuzahs on their doorpost, or maybe they stuck them on the outside of it or whatever. But in a lot of places, you'll actually see cut into a stone a place for a mezuzah. So the question is, why don't they have mezuzahs earlier than then? And I also where I was asking it was in the tunnel tours. So they're just always doing new excavation around the wall. That's the continuation of the kotel, and they just dug all this incredible stuff, rooms and cisterns and all these kinds of places. And I remember I asked this guide who was from Shiloh, have you found any indication of mezuzahs there? And he took it really personally, like I was trying to do something. But that's an interesting thing.